The entire royal palace glittered with gold and candlelight as nobles from across the kingdom gathered for what the king had called a ceremony of truth. Silk banners hung from the high stone walls, musicians played softly near the pillars, and rows of powerful wolves stood beside their masters, their eyes glowing in the dim light. It was meant to be a celebration of loyalty, a moment where the king would prove that no traitor could hide within his kingdom. So everyone in the grand hall believed they were about to witness justice. None of them knew they were about to witness the fall of a king. At the center of the hall stood a young woman in heavy silver chains, the restraints wrapped tightly around her wrists and ankles, the metal pressing into her skin as if it were alive. Two royal guards forced her to remain on her knees before the throne, their hands gripping her shoulders so she could not move. Her dark hair hung loosely around her face, hiding her expression, but her quiet breathing was the only sign that she was not broken. The nobles whispered among themselves, some leaning forward with curiosity, others with cruel smiles. To them, she was nothing more than entertainment. Rumors had spread for weeks about a girl inside the palace who had never shifted. Some said she was powerless. Some said she was cursed. Others believed she was hiding something dangerous. The king had heard the rumors, and now he intended to reveal the truth in front of the entire kingdom. High above the hall, the throne rose on a platform of carved stone, and the king sat watching her with cold satisfaction. His golden crown reflected the firelight, and his fingers rested calmly on the armrests as if he were already victorious. "This girl stands accused of hiding her wolf," the king announced, his voice echoing through the chamber. "Tonight, we will see the truth." A murmur passed through the crowd. The girl slowly lifted her head, and for a brief moment her eyes met the king's. There was no panic in them, no desperation, only a quiet warning. Her voice came out soft but clear. "You should not force this." Some nobles laughed. Others shook their heads as if she were foolish for speaking to the king that way. The king only smiled. "Every wolf can be forced to shift," he said, "and tonight you will." The guards tightened the silver restraints, and the metal began to glow faintly as the magic within them activated. The girl's body tensed immediately, her fingers curling into fists as the pain spread through her veins. The air inside the hall seemed to grow heavier. The torches flickered. Even the trained wolves beside the nobles began to whine uneasily. Still, the king raised his hand. "Begin the ritual." The silver restraints flared brighter. The girl gasped as the magic surged into her body, forcing the change to begin whether she wanted it or not. The nobles leaned forward in their seats, eager to see what kind of wolf would appear. They expected something small, something weak, something ordinary. Instead, a strange light began to form beneath her skin. At first, it looked like moonlight trapped inside her veins. Then the glow grew stronger and stronger, until the entire hall began to fill with silver light. The musicians stopped playing. The whispers died. Even the guards stepped back in fear. Because this was not normal. This was not possible. Something was very wrong. And in that moment, the king realized he may have made a terrible mistake. But by then, it was already too late. Before we continue, make sure you subscribe to the channel and comment below where you're watching from. Because this is the story of how one forced transformation changed an entire kingdom forever, and how the girl they tried to break became the ruler they could never control. And what emerged from those silver chains was not just a wolf. Long before the night of the ceremony, before the chains and the watching crowd, she had lived in the palace like someone who did not belong there. Most people did not even know her name. To the nobles, she was just another servant moving quietly through the halls, carrying trays of food or bundles of cloth, keeping her head lowered so she would not attract attention. The palace was a place of power and pride, filled with warriors and noble bloodlines, and someone like her existed at the very bottom of that world. No one expected anything from her except silence and obedience, and over time she learned that the safest way to survive was to give them exactly that. She woke before sunrise every morning, when the palace corridors were still dark and cold, and the only sounds were the footsteps of the night guards changing shifts. While nobles slept under heavy blankets and warm fires, she worked in the quiet hours, cleaning floors and carrying water from the lower wells. The servants rarely spoke to her unless they had to, and even among them she remained an outsider. Some believed she brought bad luck, so while others avoided her because of the rumours that followed her wherever she went. The rumours had begun years ago. Every werewolf in the kingdom was expected to shift by adulthood. It was the moment that proved strength and identity, the moment that marked someone as a true member of their pack. But she had never shifted. Not once. Not during the full moons when the air filled with restless energy. Not during training seasons when young wolves discovered their strength. Not even by accident, which many said was impossible. At first, people assumed she was simply a late bloomer. Then the whispers changed. She has no wolf. She is empty. She is broken. She is cursed. Some nobles openly mocked her when she passed, calling her human girl or half-blood, even though no one truly knew where she came from. A few young warriors once cornered her in one of the outer courtyards, demanding that she prove she had a wolf. When she said nothing and tried to walk away, they laughed and shoved her to the ground, telling her that even servants' wolves would be stronger than whatever she had inside her. She never fought back. She never argued. She simply stood up and walked away as if their words meant nothing. But the truth was she remembered every insult, every stare, every laugh behind her back. And still, she kept her secret. There were moments when strange things happened around her, small things that most people never noticed. A candle flame would suddenly stretch higher when she grew upset. A locked door would rattle faintly when she stood too close. Once a silver tray slipped from a servant's hands and bent strangely when it struck the floor near her feet, as if the metal had softened for just a second before hardening again. No one ever connected these things to her, except one person. An old servant woman who had worked in the palace longer than anyone could remember had begun watching her closely. The woman rarely spoke, and when she did, her voice sounded thin with age, but her eyes missed very little. One evening, as the girl finished scrubbing the stone floors near the servant quarters, the old woman approached quietly and set down a small cloth beside her. Inside was a simple piece of bread. "You must eat," the woman said softly. The girl thanked her and tried to continue working, but the old woman did not leave. Instead, she leaned closer and spoke in a voice low enough that no one else could hear. "You should not stay here much longer." The girl looked up in confusion. "This palace is not safe for someone like you," the old woman said. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then the girl asked the question she had never dared to ask anyone. "What do you think I am?" The old woman studied her carefully before answering. "I think," she said slowly, "you are something the king would fear." Those words stayed with her long after the old woman walked away, because if the king feared her, then eventually he would find her. And the king had begun searching. In recent months, royal guards had started appearing more frequently in the servant quarters, asking questions about wolves who had not yet registered with the crown. The king had introduced new laws requiring every werewolf to prove their identity and bloodline, claiming it was necessary to protect the kingdom from hidden threats. Those who failed to comply were taken away, and few ever returned. Each time the guards came near her, she kept her head down and her voice quiet, answering only what was asked, and nothing more. But fear followed her like a shadow. She knew it was only a matter of time before someone noticed her absence from the royal records. Only a matter of time before someone spoke her name. And that moment came on a cold morning when 2 royal guards appeared outside the servant hall, asking a single question. "Where is the girl who has never shifted?" someone answered. She never learned who. All she knew was that by evening the guards returned. This time, they came for her. The man who ruled the kingdom was feared long before the night of the ceremony, and even those who served him closely spoke his name with caution when he was not present. To the people of the capital, he was a powerful ruler who had brought order and strength to the realm. But inside the palace walls, the truth was far darker. His rise to power had not been peaceful, and those who remembered the old royal family rarely spoke of them anymore. Over the years, stories of what happened to the previous rulers had faded into quiet rumours, passed in whispers between servants and elders who still remembered a different time. Some said the former king and queen had died suddenly from illness. Others claimed they had been betrayed by their own guards. And some believed something much worse had happened on the night the throne changed hands. No official record ever explained the truth, and the man who now wore the crown never allowed the past to be discussed. From the moment he took the throne, the kingdom began to change. New laws were introduced almost immediately, each one stricter than the last. The king claimed he was protecting the realm from hidden enemies and traitors. And at first, many nobles supported him. The borders became heavily guarded, travellers were questioned more often, and every wolf in the kingdom was ordered to register their bloodline with the crown. Wolves who came from respected families were welcomed and recorded, but those who could not prove their lineage quickly became targets of suspicion. Anyone without clear ties to a recognised pack was treated as a potential threat. At first, these measures seemed like caution. Over time, they became control. The king trusted very few people, and even those closest to him understood that loyalty had to be proven again and again. Royal advisers who disagreed with his decisions quietly disappeared from court, replaced by men who spoke only in agreement. Guards who questioned orders were reassigned or dismissed. Servants who overheard the wrong conversations were removed without explanation. The palace became a place where silence meant survival, and everyone learned to measure their words carefully. The king himself encouraged this fear. He rarely smiled unless someone was suffering, and when he did, the expression never reached his eyes. During court sessions, he listened to petitions with cold patience, often letting long moments of silence stretch across the room before speaking. Those who stood before him never knew whether they would leave with a reward or a punishment. Even powerful nobles lowered their heads when addressing him, careful not to provoke his temper. What troubled him most was the idea that someone stronger might exist. He believed power belonged only to those who could take it and keep it, and because he had seized the throne himself, he could never fully trust that it would remain his. Stories of powerful wolves unsettled him deeply, especially the old legends about bloodlines that carried rare and extraordinary strength. He ordered scholars to gather every record they could find about ancient wolf lineages, studying the histories as if they were battle plans. When he heard tales of wolves with unusual abilities, he demanded investigations. If a wolf showed signs of uncommon strength, royal guards were sent to observe them closely. Over time, this obsession turned into paranoia. He became convinced that hidden wolves existed throughout the kingdom, waiting for the right moment to challenge him. And the idea that a true heir might still live somewhere haunted him more than any enemy army ever could. The previous royal family had been known for their powerful wolves, and though he believed he had eliminated every threat, doubt lingered in his mind like a wound that would not heal. That doubt led to the creation of the forced shifting ceremonies. The king announced them as a necessary measure to protect the realm, claiming that any loyal wolf would willingly reveal their true nature. Some public gatherings were arranged where suspected wolves were brought forward and forced to shift under the watch of nobles and guards. Those whose wolves appeared normal were dismissed, though often with permanent records placed against their names. Those who resisted were punished. Those whose wolves seemed unusual were rarely seen again. These ceremonies became a form of entertainment for some nobles, who attended out of curiosity rather than duty. They watched as frightened individuals were dragged forward and subjected to the king's tests, sometimes placing quiet bets on what kind of wolves would emerge. To them, it was a spectacle that proved the king's authority. To the rest of the kingdom, it was a warning. No one could hide forever. The king believed these rituals strengthened his rule, but in truth they only revealed how deeply he feared losing power. And every forced transformation was meant to prove that he controlled the wolves of the realm, that no hidden strength existed beyond his reach. He spoke often about loyalty and order, but beneath those words lay a single truth that guided everything he did. He feared prophecy. Among the old records he studied were fragments of ancient predictions, stories passed down from the earliest days of the kingdom. Most were vague and easily dismissed. But one legend had captured his attention more than any other. It spoke of a wolf unlike any other, a creature marked by silver light, born from the true royal bloodline. According to the story, this wolf would rise when the kingdom had lost its way and would reclaim what had been stolen. The king ordered the records sealed away, forbidding anyone to speak of them. But he never forgot. Years passed, and still he searched for signs of anything unusual. Each report of a strange wolf drew his interest. Each rumor of hidden power reached his ears sooner or later. When the first whispers reached him about a servant girl who had never shifted, he dismissed them at first as unimportant. But the rumors continued, spreading quietly through the palace halls. A girl without a wolf was impossible. A girl hiding her wolf was dangerous. And a girl who might possess something unknown was unacceptable. The king ordered an investigation without announcing it publicly. Guards questioned servants and examined the royal records, searching for any trace of her origins. They found almost nothing. No clear record of birth, no known family, no registered pack. To the king, that absence of information meant only one thing: someone had hidden her. That was when suspicion turned into certainty. By the time she was finally brought before him in chains, the king had already decided what she must be. In his mind, she was either a fraud who needed to be exposed or a hidden threat that needed to be destroyed. Either outcome would serve his purpose. And as he watched her kneel before the throne, quiet and unafraid, he felt something he had not expected. Not doubt, not mercy, but a deep, rising satisfaction. Because he believed that by forcing her to shift in front of the entire kingdom, he would prove once and for all that no power existed beyond his control. Yet he believed the ceremony would strengthen his throne. He believed the kingdom would leave that hall more loyal than ever. He believed the girl in chains would be remembered as nothing more than another example of his authority. As he sat upon the throne that night, looking down at the quiet servant girl surrounded by silver restraints, he felt certain that the ceremony would end exactly as he intended. He had no idea that the moment he had waited for would be the beginning of his downfall. By the time the ceremony began, the great hall of the palace had been transformed into a display of royal power unlike anything the kingdom had seen in years. Tall banners bearing the king's crest hung from the towering stone columns, their dark colours illuminated by rows of flickering torches fixed high along the walls. Hundreds of candles burned in silver holders placed along long wooden tables, filling the air with the scent of warm wax and smoke. The polished marble floor reflected the golden light, making the entire chamber seem brighter than usual, as if the palace itself had been prepared to witness something important. Word of the ceremony had spread quickly through the capital, and nobles arrived from distant territories dressed in their finest clothing, eager to witness the king's latest display of authority. Lords and ladies filled the raised seating areas along the sides of the hall, their voices blending into a low murmur as they discussed the rumours surrounding the event. Some spoke with excitement, expecting an unusual spectacle. Others watched in quiet unease, uncertain why the king had insisted on making this particular forced shifting so public. Warriors stood in full armor along the edges of the chamber, their polished breastplates catching the firelight as they remained perfectly still. Each guard had been carefully selected for loyalty, and their presence alone reminded everyone in the hall that this was not merely a ceremony. It was a demonstration of control. No one would interrupt what was about to happen. Near the front of the hall, the nobles who possessed wolves kept them close at their sides. Large wolves with thick fur and glowing eyes rested beside their masters, their bodies tense in the unfamiliar atmosphere. Some lay quietly on the floor, while others remained standing with their ears raised and reacting to sounds and movements that humans could not detect. A few of the wolves paced slowly, restless and uneasy, though their masters assumed it was simply the crowded room making them uncomfortable. At the far end of the chamber rose the royal platform, carved from heavy stone and raised high enough that everyone present could see it clearly. The throne stood at its centre, tall and imposing, its carved back shaped into the image of a great wolf. Golden armrests curved outward like claws, and red velvet cushions rested against the dark wood. Above the throne hung the royal banner, marking the seat of power that ruled the entire kingdom. The king sat upon the throne in full ceremonial attire, wearing a heavy cloak trimmed with dark fur that fell over the sides of the seat. The crown rested firmly on his head, its jewels glimmering in the candlelight, as he watched the gathering crowd with steady confidence. His posture remained relaxed, as though the entire event had already gone exactly as he intended. At his side stood several royal advisors and high-ranking officers, their expressions serious as they waited for the ceremony to begin. None of them spoke unless addressed, and even then their voices remained quiet and careful. The king's mood that evening was impossible to read, and no one wished to risk saying the wrong thing. The musicians played near the rear of the hall, filling the air with slow and measured notes that echoed gently against the high stone ceiling. The sound created a strange calm that contrasted sharply with the tension building among the crowd. Every person present understood that this ceremony was meant to reveal something, though few knew exactly what. Then the great doors at the entrance to the hall opened. The sound of the heavy wood shifting against stone drew every eye in the room toward the entrance. 4 royal guards stepped inside first, their boots striking the marble floor in steady rhythm as they walked forward. Between them walked the girl. Silver chains bound her wrists tightly together, with longer lengths of metal running down to the restraints locked around her ankles. Each movement caused the chains to scrape softly against the floor, the sound barely audible yet impossible to ignore in the suddenly quiet hall. The metal shimmered faintly under the torchlight, but the enchanted silver designed to weaken any wolf who came into contact with it. The musicians stopped playing. The last notes faded into silence as the procession moved forward. Nobles leaned toward one another, whispering behind raised hands while studying the prisoner with open curiosity. Some looked disappointed by her appearance, clearly expecting someone more threatening. Others smiled quietly, or already convinced that the ceremony would confirm what they believed, that the girl possessed nothing at all. She walked slowly but without resistance, her posture straight despite the weight of the chains pulling against her arms. Her clothing was simple and worn compared to the fine fabrics surrounding her, marking her clearly as a servant among nobles. Strands of her dark hair fell loosely around her face, partially hiding her expression, but there was no trembling in her steps. When they reached the center of the hall, the guards forced her to stop. One guard pushed down on her shoulder, guiding her onto her knees before the royal platform. The chains tightened as she lowered herself, the silver pressing firmly against her skin. A faint reaction passed through her body, subtle enough that most of the crowd did not notice, but the nearest wolves lifted their heads at once, their noses twitching as if sensing something unfamiliar in the air. The guards stepped back but remained close, forming a half circle around her while keeping their hands near their weapons. For a long moment, nothing happened. The king allowed the silence to stretch across the chamber until every whisper had faded and every movement had stilled. The entire hall seemed to hold its breath as he slowly rose from the throne. His boots echoed softly against the stone platform as he stepped forward. "This gathering," he announced, his voice carrying easily through the vast chamber, "has been called so that truth may stand before us." The nobles listened closely, their attention fixed entirely on him. "For too long," he continued, "there have been those who hide among us, concealing their true nature while claiming loyalty to this kingdom." He gestured toward the girl without looking at her. "This one stands accused of hiding her wolf." A ripple of quiet conversation moved through the crowd. The king raised his hand slightly and the room fell silent again. "In my kingdom," he said firmly, "no wolf remains unaccounted for. No strength remains hidden. Loyalty must be proven, not claimed." His eyes finally settled on the girl kneeling below. "You have lived within these walls," he said, "yet no record exists of your wolf or your bloodline." She did not respond. The king stepped closer to the edge of the platform. "Speak," he ordered. "Do you deny these accusations?" Slowly, she lifted her head. Her eyes met his without hesitation. "I deny nothing," she said quietly. A few nobles exchanged surprised glances at the calmness in her voice. The king studied her carefully. "Then you will shift," he declared, "here and now, before this court." The guards moved forward immediately, adjusting the restraints around her wrists and ankles. The silver links tightened, pressing more firmly against her skin as the enchantments began to awaken. She drew in a slow breath. "You do not understand," she said softly. One of the guards hesitated, glancing briefly toward the throne. The king's expression hardened. "Every wolf shifts when commanded," he said. "And tonight, you will prove what you are." Her voice remained steady. "You should not force this." Laughter broke out among several nobles. One man shook his head openly, whispering to the woman beside him as if the outcome were already certain. The king gave a small nod. "Begin." The guards activated the restraints. The silver chains began to glow faintly. The moment the magic surged through the metal, her body stiffened as the force of the enchantment pressed inward, searching for the wolf within her. The air in the hall seemed to shift. Several wolves near the front of the crowd stood suddenly, low growls forming deep in their throats as their instincts reacted to something they could not understand. Still, most of the nobles watched with expectation, convinced they were about to see nothing more than an ordinary transformation. No one yet realized that the ceremony meant to display the king's power was about to reveal something far greater. The moment the silver restraints were fully activated, the change began with a violence no one in the hall had expected. The glow along the chains deepened from a faint shimmer into a harsh, burning light, spreading across the metal like fire trapped beneath the surface. The magic forced its way into her body without mercy, searching for the wolf within her and dragging it forward whether she was ready or not. Her back straightened suddenly as the first wave of pain struck, and a sharp breath escaped her lips before she could stop it. The guards stepped backward almost at once, giving her space as the magic took hold. They had seen forced transformations before, but even they sensed that something about this moment felt different. The air around her seemed heavier, thick enough that breathing felt slower and more difficult. A faint pressure filled the hall, subtle but impossible to ignore. She tried to steady herself, pressing her chained hands against the marble floor as if anchoring herself in place, but the silver burned against her skin. The enchantment did not simply restrain her. It pushed inward, demanding that the wolf reveal itself. The pain spread through her arms and into her chest, and pulling something deep inside her toward the surface. Her fingers curled tightly against the stone. A low sound escaped her throat, somewhere between a breath and a cry. The nobles leaned forward, watching closely as the transformation began to take shape. Many had witnessed wolves shifting before. They expected to see the familiar signs: muscles tightening, bones reshaping, fur appearing in uneven patches. Forced shifts were always painful, but they followed a pattern that experienced eyes recognized easily. This did not follow that pattern. Her shoulders trembled as the magic surged again, stronger than before. The silver restraints brightened sharply, their glow reflecting across the marble floor and up the stone pillars. The chains rattled faintly as her body strained against them, not in resistance but in reaction to the power forcing its way through her. Her breathing grew uneven. The sound echoed through the silent hall. Several wolves among the nobles began to pace restlessly, their claws clicking softly against the stone. One large wolf pulled back entirely, pressing against its master's legs with a quiet whine. Another lowered itself close to the ground, ears flattened as if sensing a distant threat. Still, the king watched with calm anticipation. He had seen fear before. He had seen resistance before. And he believed this moment was no different. Another surge of magic struck. Her body jerked sharply as the transformation deepened. The muscles along her arms tightened, and faint lines of light began to appear beneath her skin, moving like flowing silver just below the surface. At first, it was barely visible, a subtle shimmer that might have been mistaken for reflection from the torches. Then the glow intensified. It spread upward along her arms and across her shoulders, tracing patterns no one present had ever seen before. The light pulsed in slow waves, as if responding to a rhythm deeper than the magic forcing it into existence. A murmur passed through the crowd. Some nobles shifted uneasily in their seats. Others leaned closer, unable to look away. Her head lowered as the pressure inside her grew stronger. The chains trembled again, vibrating softly against the marble floor, as if reacting to something building inside her. She tried to hold it back. For a moment it seemed as if she might succeed. Her breathing slowed slightly, and the glow dimmed just enough to give the impression that the transformation was stabilizing. Then the restraints flared again. The magic surged harder than before, overwhelming whatever control she had managed to keep. The silver light beneath her skin burst outward in sharp flashes, illuminating her form in sudden pulses that cast moving shadows across the walls. Her cry broke the silence at last. It echoed through the hall, filled with pain but also something deeper, something that sounded less like fear and more like resistance breaking apart. The torches along the walls flickered violently. One by one, the flames bent inward as if pulled by an unseen force. Cold air swept across the chamber, carrying with it a strange stillness that settled over the crowd. The musicians near the back of the hall stood frozen, their instruments hanging forgotten in their hands. The royal advisers exchanged uncertain glances. Even the guards nearest the platform shifted their footing, their confidence fading as the transformation grew more unstable. Her body began to change more rapidly now. The structure of her shoulders shifted, and her posture lowered as if pulled by invisible weight. The bones in her arms reshaped beneath the glowing skin, each movement marked by sharp tension that ran through her entire form. The chains tightened as her wrists thickened, the metal pressing deeper against her skin. For a moment it looked as though the restraints might hold, their enchanted glow burning brighter in response. Then a faint cracking sound echoed outward. One of the silver links strained, bending slightly before snapping back into place. Several nobles gasped softly. That should not have been possible. The silver restraints were forged specifically to contain powerful wolves. Yet, something inside her continued to push outward against them. The glow beneath her skin brightened again, no longer faint or uncertain, but steady and unmistakable. Silver light flowed through her veins in clear lines now, illuminating her arms and neck like living threads of moonlight. The entire hall began to fill with a pale reflection of that light. It shimmered across the marble floor and climbed the stone pillars, soft at first but growing stronger with each passing second. The wolves reacted before the humans did. One after another they lowered themselves to the ground, their heads dipping instinctively as quiet whines escaped their throats. Even the strongest among them showed signs of submission, their bodies tense with a mixture of fear and recognition they could not understand. Still, the king remained standing, but his expression had begun to change. The certainty in his eyes faded slowly, replaced by something far less controlled: uncertainty. Because this was not a normal forced transformation. This was something else entirely. The silver light intensified until it became impossible to ignore. It radiated outward from her body in steady waves, bright enough now to rival the torchlight itself. Shadows retreated across the hall as the glow spread farther, washing over nobles and guards alike in pale illumination. The chains rattled violently. Her body rose slightly from its kneeling position, not fully standing but no longer pressed against the floor. The magic within the restraints flared one final time, as if making a last attempt to contain what was happening. For a single breathless moment, everything seemed suspended. The light held steady. The air fell completely silent. Even the restless wolves became still. Then the silver glow burst outward in a sudden surge that filled the entire chamber. And in that blinding flash of light, the girl disappeared. For a single breathless moment after the burst of silver light, and no one in the great hall could see anything at all. The brilliance had spread across the chamber like a second sunrise, washing out the glow of the torches and swallowing every shadow. Nobles raised their hands to shield their eyes, and several stepped backward in confusion, unsure whether the magic had ended or if something worse was still coming. The air felt charged with a strange energy that pressed against the skin like a silent storm waiting to break. Then the light began to fade. At first, it withdrew slowly, the brightness thinning into a pale glow that hovered low over the marble floor. Shapes began to return: the pillars, the rows of nobles, the raised platform with the throne, all emerging from the silver haze, piece by piece. The guards closest to the centre squinted through the remaining glow, their hands drifting toward their weapons without conscious thought. Where the girl had been kneeling only seconds before, something else now stood. It was larger than any wolf in the hall. Massive shoulders rose high above where her human form would have reached, and the creature's broad frame cast a long shadow behind it as the last of the silver light settled into its fur. The chains that had once bound her lay broken across the floor in twisted pieces, their enchanted glow completely extinguished, as if the magic within them had been drained away. The wolf's fur shone with a pale metallic sheen, each strand catching the torchlight like threads of polished silver. It did not simply reflect the light, it seemed to hold it, as though moonlight lived within the creature itself. The glow was softer now than during the transformation, but still strong enough that the wolf appeared almost unreal against the darker stone around it. No one moved. No one spoke. Even the guards stood frozen where they were. The wolf lifted its head slowly, revealing eyes that gleamed with a steady brightness unlike anything the court had ever seen. They were not wild or confused as newly shifted wolves often were. There was awareness in those eyes, calm, focused awareness, as though the creature understood exactly where it stood and exactly who surrounded it. A low breath passed through the hall, not quite a gasp, but close enough that it carried from one end of the chamber to the other. Several nobles instinctively rose from their seats, stepping backward as the full size of the wolf became clear. It stood taller than the largest war wolves in the kingdom, its powerful limbs planted firmly against the marble floor, as if the palace itself belonged beneath its paws. The broken silver chains lay scattered around it like discarded threads. One of the royal wolves let out a quiet whimper. Another lowered itself completely to the ground, pressing its body flat against the stone. Within seconds, the reactions spread. Two wolves across the hall dropped into submissive positions one by one, their heads lowered and their ears flattened as instinct overcame training. Their masters stared down at them in confusion. These were battle-trained wolves, creatures that had stood beside warriors in combat without hesitation. Yet now, they trembled. And none of them dared to rise. The silver wolf took a single step forward. The sound of its paw against the marble floor echoed softly through the hall, impossibly loud in the silence. A guard nearest to the platform instinctively retreated 2 steps before catching himself, his hand tightening around the hilt of his sword. He glanced toward the throne as if waiting for instruction, but for the first time since the ceremony began, no order came. The king remained standing at the edge of the platform, staring down at the creature before him. His expression had changed completely. The confidence that had filled his posture earlier had faded into stillness. His eyes moved slowly over the wolf's form, taking in the impossible color of its fur, the unnatural glow that lingered along its outline, the sheer size that surpassed any wolf recorded in the kingdom's history. He knew what he was looking at, even if he refused to admit it. The wolf raised its head higher, its gaze lifting towards the throne. A faint ripple moved through the crowd as nobles shifted uneasily beneath that silent attention. It felt as though the creature saw everything at once, the guards gripping their weapons, the advisors frozen beside the throne, the nobles who had laughed only minutes before. And none of them could hold its gaze for long. One elderly nobleman sank slowly back into his seat, his face pale as realization began to take shape. Another lowered his head without fully understanding why. The air seemed different now, heavier, charged with something deeper than fear, recognition. The silver wolf stood completely still for several long seconds, its steady breathing the only movement in the center of the hall. Each slow rise and fall of its chest seemed deliberate, controlled, as though the transformation had not taken anything from it, but instead revealed what had always been there. Then it turned slightly, the motion smooth and powerful, and the torchlight swept across its fur in waves of shifting brightness. The creature's presence filled the chamber in a way no human ever could. It did not need to growl. It did not need to bare its teeth. Power radiated from it in quiet certainty. Several guards lowered their weapons without realizing they had done so. Others loosened their grips as doubt crept into their minds. This was not the weak servant they had dragged into the hall. This was not an ordinary wolf forced into existence by magic. This was something older than the king's rule, something greater than the authority of the throne. The silver wolf turned its head once more toward the raised platform. Its glowing eyes settled on the king. And in that silent exchange, something shifted that every person in the hall could feel, but none could explain. Because for the first time since he had taken the throne, the king looked uncertain. For several long moments after the silver wolf appeared, no one in the great hall dared to speak. The silence felt deeper than fear, as if the entire court sensed that something larger than the ceremony itself had begun to unfold. The nobles looked at one another in uncertainty, searching for reassurance that this moment could still be explained in ordinary terms. But no one found it. The creature standing in the center of the chamber had already shattered everything they thought they understood. It was one of the oldest men in the hall, who finally broke the silence. He stood slowly from his seat, among the royal advisors, his movement hesitant at first, as though he were unsure whether he should speak at all. His hair had turned almost completely white over the years, and his hands trembled faintly as he leaned on the carved cane he carried with him. He had served in the palace long before the current king had taken the throne, and though most people paid little attention to him now, there had been a time when his voice carried weight. When he stepped forward, Several nobles turned toward him in confusion. His eyes were fixed entirely on the silver wolf. "I have seen this before," he said quietly. Though his voice was not loud, the words carried across the silent hall. The king's head turned sharply toward him. "What did you say?" the king demanded. The old adviser did not immediately answer. He seemed to struggle with the weight of what he was about to reveal, as though years of silence pressed heavily against his words. At last, he spoke again. "That wolf," he said slowly, "belongs to the royal bloodline." A ripple of shock spread through the nobles. Some whispered in disbelief. Others stared at the silver wolf with renewed attention, as if trying to see what they had missed before. The king's expression hardened instantly. "That bloodline ended years ago," he said sharply. "You know this." The adviser did not look at him. Instead, he kept his gaze on the wolf as though the truth stood before him in undeniable form. "No," he said quietly. "It did not." The tension in the hall deepened at once. Several nobles leaned forward, their earlier amusement completely gone. Even those who had supported the king closely began to exchange uncertain glances, because the old adviser was not a man known for reckless words. "There were stories," the adviser continued, his voice growing steadier as he spoke. "Long before this throne changed hands, stories passed down through generations of the royal line." He paused, drawing a slow breath. "The true rulers of this kingdom carried a rare wolf among their blood, a wolf marked by silver light, a wolf said to be born only when the kingdom lost its rightful path." The nobles listened in complete silence now. Many had heard fragments of these tales as children, dismissed as nothing more than legends told by elders who lived too much in the past. But standing before the silver wolf, those old stories no longer sounded distant or imaginary. "They said this wolf could not be hidden forever," the adviser went on. "They said it would rise when the time came for the throne to be reclaimed." The king stepped forward on the platform, anger rising in his voice. "Enough," he said. "You speak of myths and old songs." But the adviser continued as though he had not heard him. "The last royal family possessed this wolf," he said. "The king before you. His blood carried the mark of silver." A murmur swept through the hall again, louder this time. Everyone present knew what he was implying, even before he spoke the words openly. "When the old royal family fell," the adviser said, "it was believed that no heirs survived." He lowered his gaze briefly. "But there were rumours." The king's voice cut sharply through the chamber. "Rumours are meaningless." The adviser lifted his head again. "Servants spoke of a child," he said, "a daughter taken from the palace on the night the throne changed hands, hidden before the guards could find her." The hall seemed to grow even quieter. Some nobles turned slowly toward the silver wolf again, their faces pale as realization began to settle into place. The adviser spoke the final words with quiet certainty. That child would be of royal blood. The meaning settled over the court like a weight. All eyes moved between the wolf and the throne. Because if the adviser spoke the truth, then the creature standing in the center of the hall was not simply a powerful wolf, it was the rightful heir. The king's face darkened. "This is nonsense," he said, a desperate attempt to create doubt. But even as he spoke, his voice lacked the certainty it once held, because deep within his memory, he knew the stories. He had studied them himself. He had feared them. And now the silver wolf stood before him exactly as the old records had described. The adviser spoke once more. "The silver wolf does not appear by accident," he said, "where it belongs only to the true ruler of this kingdom." The words echoed in the silence that followed. Around the hall, nobles shifted uneasily, the balance of power beginning to tilt in ways none of them had expected when they arrived. Some stared openly at the king now, measuring his reaction. Others kept their eyes lowered, unwilling to reveal what they were thinking. because if the silver wolf truly belonged to the royal bloodline, then the man sitting on the throne had never truly owned it. And for the first time since the ceremony began, the king seemed to understand what the others were beginning to realize. The prophecy he had tried to bury had not been destroyed. It had been waiting in silence, waiting in the shadows of his own palace, waiting for the moment he would force it into the light. While the silver wolf stood unmoving at the center of the hall, its glowing eyes fixed steadily on the throne, as if it had known all along that this moment would come. And slowly, quietly, the court began to understand the truth. The girl they had mocked, the servant they had chained, the wolf the king had tried to expose, was not a traitor. She was the heir he had failed to erase. The first crack in the king's certainty began as a subtle thing, almost imperceptible. He had spent years building his throne on fear, obedience, and control, but standing before the silver wolf, all of that confidence began to unravel. The creature's glowing eyes fixed on him with unwavering certainty, and for the first time, he realized he was no longer in command. The hall was quiet, but it was the kind of silence that spoke louder than any roar, the kind of silence that whispered of judgment and consequences long denied. Every noble, every guard, every wolf in the room sensed it. The balance of power had shifted, and they all instinctively knew that the king's era had ended. The king took a step forward, trying to reclaim the authority that had never felt more fragile. His voice, once commanding, wavered slightly as he demanded, "What is this? This creature? This girl? Who dares?" But the silver wolf did not flinch. Its fur shimmered with silver light that seemed to pulse in rhythm with the king's racing heartbeat. Each slow movement it made filled the hall with a quiet, undeniable dominance. The guards closest to the wolf faltered, unsure if they were meant to attack or flee, their confidence shaken as the truth of its power pressed down on them. The king's anger rose quickly, sharp and desperate. "I am the ruler of this kingdom," he shouted. "I command loyalty. I command power. Bow before me." But the hall did not respond. The nobles no longer bowed their heads in reverence. The royal wolves, betrained to obey, remained low and submissive, sensing a greater authority in the silver wolf. Even the advisers who had once nodded at his every word now looked uncertain, hesitant to endorse his commands. The king realized with a cold, creeping dread that his own throne was empty of the loyalty it had once held. He tried to speak again, to assert control through sheer force of will, but the silver wolf took a single deliberate step forward. The movement was silent, yet unstoppable. The kind of motion that made even trained warriors hesitate. The glow along its fur intensified, spreading like moonlight across the hall, and every eye in the chamber was drawn to it. In that moment, the king's mind reeled. The stories of prophecy, the whispered warnings in old records, the forgotten truths of the royal bloodline. All of it pressed down upon him. The certainty that had carried him through years of fear and manipulation now turned into a crushing weight. One of the nobles gasped aloud. "The prophecy! It's true," she whispered, her voice trembling. "It's her." The king's hands clenched into fists. "Lies! All lies!" he roared, though even his own voice sounded hollow in the cavernous hall. "I am the king. I am the ruler. No prophecy will take this throne from me." But the silver wolf's gaze remained fixed on him, unblinking, unyielding. There was no anger in its eyes, only recognition. The kind of recognition that spoke louder than threats, louder than crowns, louder than swords. The first guard made a step forward, as if to defend the king, but the silver wolf's presence alone caused him to freeze, uncertainty rooting him to the floor. One by one, the rest of the guards faltered, their loyalty overwhelmed by instinct, by fear, by the undeniable truth of the wolf's authority. The king's fury turned inward as realization sank into him. The chains of power he had relied upon, the fear he had wielded, the control he thought unbreakable, it was all gone. Every decree, every punishment, every ritual of obedience had been meaningless in the presence of what was true. He had ruled a kingdom built on lies, and now the truth stood before him in the form of a silver wolf glowing like moonlight in the middle of the great hall. He stumbled backward, losing the balance that had always given him confidence. The throne that had once seemed eternal now looked fragile, small, incapable of holding him. The nobles watched, some in awe, some in fear, as the man who had commanded their lives now realized he had no command over what was truly powerful. For the first time, the king felt vulnerability, raw, undeniable, and consuming. His voice faltered, then fell silent entirely. Every breath he drew seemed shallow compared to the presence before him. Even his crown felt heavy, a weight that mocked him rather than empowering him. The silver wolf stepped closer to the throne, and its movements calm and measured, and the golden light in its fur spread across the platform, touching the edges of the king's robes. The glow illuminated the truth. He was no longer the apex of the kingdom. He was no longer the master of fear, the wielder of control, the arbiter of loyalty. The nobles understood it too. Whispers spread through the hall like wildfire, soft at first, then louder, louder still. The girl, the heir, the silver wolf. The realization struck the court with a force stronger than any weapon. The king had ruled in arrogance, and now everyone present could see his reign was over. He tried to speak, to reclaim something of his dignity, but his words faltered and died on his tongue. The silver wolf moved once more, a deliberate, silent assertion of the power he had always feared. And the king fell to his knees, not from physical force, but from the undeniable weight of truth pressing upon him. The hall seemed to shift around him. The light of the silver wolf filled every corner, erasing the shadows that had once cloaked his authority. The nobles, once obedient, now looked on with respect, awe, and a quiet fear, finally recognizing the legitimacy of the heir they had mocked. In that moment, the king understood that he had lost everything: his throne, his fear-driven power, and the certainty that had guided him through his reign. And as he sank fully to the marble floor, defeated, the silver wolf stepped forward, its glowing eyes calm and unwavering. The kingdom had a new ruler. The fall of the king was complete. The air in the hall, once thick with the weight of authority and expectation, shifted into something new. A promise of justice, a return of the rightful bloodline, and the undeniable truth that power could not be forced. It could only be earned. And the silver wolf, standing proud in the center of the great hall, had earned it. The great hall, once filled with the heavy tension of fear and authority, now felt different. The torches flickered softly, illuminating the silver wolf, whose glowing fur still caught every eye in the room. Nobles and guards alike stood in stunned silence, some frozen by awe, others by fear, but all understanding that a new era had begun. The girl, the one they had chained, mocked, and underestimated, began to shift again, but this time on her own terms. The silver glow receded from her fur into a more controlled shimmer, her body resizing and reshaping until she stood before the court as something both human and magnificent, a queen born from moonlight and bloodline alike. She raised her head, and her eyes, now carrying the calm confidence of her wolf form, scanned the entire hall. The king, fallen at the base of the throne, looked up with disbelief, still grasping at the remnants of the power he had thought unshakable. The nobles had stopped whispering, realizing that this girl, the servant who had never shifted, was no ordinary wolf, no ordinary heir. She was their new sovereign. Slowly, she stepped forward. Her movements were graceful but deliberate, each one a statement of authority. She wore no crown yet, but the air around her seemed to recognize her as ruler, bending subtly to her presence. The broken silver chains lay at her feet, her reminders of the oppression she had endured, now useless against the power she carried inherently. The old advisor who had first revealed the hidden truth of her bloodline stepped forward cautiously and bowed deeply. "Your Majesty," he whispered, his voice trembling with reverence, "the kingdom recognizes you." She nodded once, a small, serene motion, acknowledging his loyalty and the weight of her new role. Her gaze shifted to the assembled nobles, some of whom had once sneered at her or doubted her existence. None of them dared speak, not a single word as they waited for her command. The silence was absolute, punctuated only by the faint rustle of the wolves that had lowered themselves in submission. Even their owners had stopped moving. Turning her attention to the fallen king, she allowed a small pause, giving him a chance to comprehend that his reign was over. His face was pale, his jaw tight with anger and fear, but the power of the silver wolf was undeniable. She took another step forward, and the light in her eyes intensified, not threatening but undeniably regal. "The kingdom has suffered under fear and false rule for too long," she said, her voice carrying clearly across the hall, strong and calm. "Power does not belong to those who rule with cruelty, but to those who protect, who serve, and who understand the true strength of our people." A quiet murmur ran through the nobles, a mixture of awe and tentative hope. Even the guards, trained to follow only the king, now shifted their allegiance without hesitation. The wolf within her gave a soft, low growl, not one of aggression but of affirmation, a statement that the kingdom now had a leader who commanded by right, not fear. She moved to the throne and, with a calm yet firm motion, climbed the steps. Every step echoed in the hall, each one carrying the weight of destiny fulfilled. As she reached the platform, then she paused and looked around at her court. The king, still on the floor, had not yet moved. She allowed herself a small, controlled smile, a reflection of triumph tempered by wisdom. "From this day forward," she continued, her voice steady and unyielding, "the kingdom will know justice, loyalty, and honor. Those who serve will be protected, and those who harm will face the consequences of their actions." She raised her hands slowly, and a faint silver light shimmered around the throne itself, connecting with the glow that lingered in her fur. The hall seemed to respond, the torches brightening, the shadows receding, and the air itself filling with a sense of renewal. The silver wolf now fully merged with her presence, a symbol of her unbreakable bond with the power she had been born to wield. The nobles, the guards, and the remaining wolves acknowledged her reign silently, their submission complete. The girl who had once been ignored, mocked, and chained had become the queen, the embodiment of the prophecy, the rightful heir, and the protector of the kingdom. And as she seated herself upon the throne, the silver glow surrounding her settled into a calm, steady light. The kingdom had a new ruler. The age of fear was over. The era of the Silver Queen had begun. Her eyes swept across the hall one final time, gleaming with intelligence and strength, and she spoke softly, but clearly enough for all to hear. "Let this kingdom remember that true power is never given. It is discovered, earned, and protected." From that moment, every heart in the hall recognized the truth. The girl who had once been no one had become everything. A queen who carried both human and wolf, courage and wisdom, past and destiny, in a single unbreakable presence. The Silver Queen had risen, the great hall once heavy with fear and the weight of tyranny now shimmered in a new light. The torches flickered gently, casting soft reflections across the marble floor, but all eyes were drawn to the throne, now occupied by the Silver Queen. Her presence was more than human, more than wolf. It was the perfect union of both, a being born of prophecy, bloodline, and destiny. The glow of her silver fur pulsed faintly, filling the room with a calm radiance that demanded attention and respect without a single word. The nobles, once proud and dismissive, now knelt, their heads bowed in acknowledgement of the true ruler. Even the king, who had fallen from power only moments before, had been brought to his knees, his pride shattered and replaced by the uncomfortable weight of realization. He understood now that the throne he had clung to through fear and force had never been truly his. Its authority belonged to her, and the silver wolf within her had proven that all along. The Silver Queen rose fully upon the throne, her form regal and composed. Her fur shimmered in the torchlight, highlighting the subtle lines of strength and grace in her body. The broken silver chains lay scattered across the floor like relics of the past, a symbol of oppression overcome and power reclaimed. She raised her gaze, scanning the hall with eyes that shone like twin moons, calm yet commanding. A hush fell over the court. The air itself seemed to hold its breath, waiting for her next words, watching for the first commands of a reign that promised to be unlike any before. "From this day forward," she began, her voice both soft and strong, "this kingdom shall know the rule of truth, not fear. The wolf and the human within me are one, bound by loyalty to this land and its people. Those who serve shall be honored, and those who harm shall face justice." The royal advisor, the oldest witness to the hidden truths of the kingdom, stepped forward once more and bowed deeply. "Your Majesty," he said, his voice thick with reverence, "the prophecy has been fulfilled. The kingdom recognizes you." The Silver Queen nodded, her gaze sweeping across the hall, acknowledging both fear and hope in equal measure. The wolves who had once been her fellow captives now moved freely among the nobles, submitting not out of terror, but recognition. Even those who had once mocked or doubted her now saw clearly the destiny that had been hidden for so long. She allowed herself a small smile as her paws rested firmly upon the throne, a symbol not of dominance, but of balance and rightful authority. The marble beneath her seemed to hum in response, and the silver light that surrounded her pulsed faintly, casting dancing shadows across the hall that mirrored the strength of her lineage. Above her, the banners of the kingdom fluttered lightly, catching the glow of her silver aura. In that moment, the palace itself seemed transformed, and no longer a place of fear, but a sanctuary of power rightly earned. The throne, once a seat of cruelty, had been reborn as the Silver Throne, reflecting not the tyranny of a single man, but the strength, courage, and justice of the true heir. She leaned slightly forward, her eyes sweeping over the nobles and the fallen king. "Let this be remembered," she said, her voice carrying through the silent hall, "that power is not taken by force alone. It is discovered, protected, and claimed by those who are worthy. The throne may hold many, but only one is rightful." The Silver Queen's presence radiated across the hall, filling every corner with a quiet but undeniable certainty. The glow of her fur and the soft pulse of silver light spread outward, touching the nobles, the guards, and the remaining wolves, binding them to the truth of her rule. The kingdom had been reclaimed, not through violence or fear, but through the revelation of destiny long hidden. And as the Silver Queen settled fully upon the throne, a profound silence enveloped the hall, one filled with awe, understanding, and the promise of a new era. The Silver Throne now bore witness to a reign of rightful power, a queen who embodied both human resilience and wolf strength, and a kingdom reborn under her luminous guidance. The prophecy had come to life. The silver wolf had risen. the kingdom would never be the same. The hall glimmered softly, and in that eternal moment, the silver throne stood as a symbol of justice, courage, and the unbreakable bond between past and future, human and wolf, and the destiny that had finally been fulfilled.